What's up, degenerates? This is Locked In. I'm your host, Mason Cameron at PFF_Mace on socials. And with me, as always, my partner in crime, Vishaal Gupta at Vishaal_Gupta95 on socials. Actually, I think I messed that up. Let me go back. Vishaal_Gupta95. There we go. I got it that time on socials. V, how are you doing? We're 2 weeks in. I can't wait to break down week 3. How are you living? What's been up with you?
Living good. Been a kind of a crazy week in the NFL, but ready for week 3. Time is absolutely flying as it always does once the season starts. But excited to talk some week 3 games today.
Yeah, well, a lot of injuries, a lot of different things happening. There's a lot of weather coming through, and we're going to break it all down here in our little betting forecast for the week. And I think there's a lot of good value on the table this week. I can't wait to break it down. First, we're going to start off. We're going to break down the Thursday night game just a little bit to see, what we can learn from a betting standpoint. And obviously, if anybody's in our Discord, we can get you the picks to any of the Thursday night games or the Monday night games, even if it's after or before the show that we pick. So definitely hit us up in there. In order to get in there, you got to join as a member, importantnonsense.com. That's how you get access to our Discord, and you can chat us up and bug all the fantasy guys about your teams and all that good stuff. So definitely make sure you do that. But we break into it. We have the Thursday night game. We had the Giants. They were playing the 49ers, unfortunately, in a kind of what you would hope would be kind of a growth moment, but it just did not look very good for them. So the game, San Francisco ended up covering by more than a touchdown. It was a 10.5 point spread by the time it closed. It's 30-12 was the final score. 43.5 the total. They go under that. San Francisco still scores 30. This is kind of why we tell you guys all the time that it takes two to tango, especially when it comes to overs. If one team isn't going to do their part, like this game came 43.5 isn't a gigantic number in terms of totals. And to think that they came a point and a half under and San Francisco scores 30, like that kind of just puts into the perspective that you got to have both teams to really put a good effort in towards some of these totals, which is why it makes it tough to lean towards some of them sometimes. But I know that we have a couple of good ones. I know you have a good one on your card this week too, which I can't wait to break into. But I mean, when we get to the Giants, V, I don't really know what to make of it. They just really don't look well coached, which is weird because we know they have the reigning coach of the year, at the helm. I don't have a lot of answers for it. They started out okay on the game. They kind of crumbled quickly. Only 150 total yards. They had 29 yards on the ground. Daniel Jones did not look good. 137 and an interception. What's happening there, V? What can you make anything out of this? Or are we going to be the type of people that probably fade the Giants all year long because they haven't shown us anything that we can kind of pin our hats to?
Yeah, definitely a tough start to the season for the New York Football Giants. I think they had a lot of hope coming into the season. They made some big additions, and then you think year 2 with Dable and Jones, there's going to be kind of maybe a leap on offense. I mean, they've had a tough schedule to start the season. Obviously, you have to play the Cowboys, you have to play the Niners on a short week, and they've had just so many injuries. I think specifically on the offensive line, it wasn't like an elite group coming into the season. But then you come into this game and you're banged up. You have Andrew Thomas not playing, who's your best player on that in that group, and you're going up against arguably the best D line in the league. It's just it was never going to be an easy game for them. It was always going to be very difficult. And unfortunately, I mean, Daniel Jones, he might not have been the issue last night, like the main issue last night, but he's also not really ever going to be a guy who's going to be the solution either, which is just kind of it's a tough thing. You're kind of stuck in the middle there. Like he's good enough where you can start him. He's a starter in this league, but he's probably never going to be good enough where you're going to win anything of consequence unless everything around him is just 100% perfect. And unfortunately for them, their schedule isn't necessarily going to get much easier throughout the season. You have to play Philly 2 times, Washington 2 times, you have to play Buffalo, Miami, still have to go to Dallas. I mean, it's not going to get a whole lot easier for these guys. So unfortunately, I'm the outlook isn't very good for them going forward this season.
Yeah, and the tough thing is that this doesn't look like it's going to get any better anytime soon because
Yeah.
they have Jones under that contract now. So that might have been a calculated blunder by them. Whereas the Niners on the other side show that you can win with good coaching and kind of middling quarterback play. And Purdy was really good last night, or I shouldn't say really good, but he was decent on Thursday. Last night, 310, 2 touchdowns. I mean, he had a horrendous turnover worthy play, which kind of made the highlights where George Kittle had to do scrap
The
because
seatbelt.
he
Yep.
had a pass breakup. And that's all good and fun, but that's a that's a horrendous downgrade for Purdy there. And even with stuff like that, they still find a way to win. They play a really sound game. Christian McCaffrey, 23 touches, 119 all purpose and a touchdown. Debo, another really good day for him, 6 for 129, a touchdown. And Kittle, always there, consistent, 7 for 90. So when you look at this offense and how this team is coached and where they draw their strength offensively, and then you look on the defensive side of the ball and think, wow, this is also probably one of the better defenses in the league over the last handful of years. And now, granted, they've kind of been handed some softer matchups in terms of offensive output, but it's still impressive. You got to play who's in front of you. They let up 12 points, no touchdowns. It's just like what's their limit? Like I think at the end of the day they went really far last year and I think they can continue to go far this year, especially if, the Eagles are obviously a really good team on paper, but they maybe started out slightly sluggish to the season. I'm interested to see how this NFC shakes out because at the end of the day, it's probably going to be one of these two teams, either San Francisco or Philly. So
Yep.
that's where I stand with it anyway. So that's the Thursday night roundup. Now we're breaking into the game. So anybody that's new to the show would understand that we don't hit every single game. We really just hit the games that we like the most, which honestly, a lot of the times that ends up being a vast majority of the games. So if there is a game that we don't touch on here that you're excited about, that you want to get our input on, like I said, hit us up in the Discord. We'll handicap any game you bring us and give you our input on where the value lies. So first off on the slate is one that we actually both have some skin on. So we have Tennessee at Cleveland. Cleveland is -3.5. The total for this game, 39.5 or 38.5 in some spots. It looks like it's moved a little bit depending on where you shop. You're on the side of Tennessee in the points. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't take it, but I really like where your head's at. I know your breakdown is going to be good for this. And we're actually both on the side of the under here. So, V, what's your analysis of this game? Why are you leaning towards Tennessee when they go into Cleveland?
Well, this is definitely not going to be a very pretty game. It never is usually when these two teams are playing football. But even though it doesn't look good. Tennessee is always kind of in the game, primarily due to their defense. They're tied for the third fewest rushing yards allowed this year, and they've allowed 0 rushing touchdowns through 2 weeks. And you have to imagine that after how Watson has started this season in Cleveland, Cleveland's game plan would hopefully be to run the ball. Watson has averaged less than 200 passing yards per game. He has 3 total touchdowns, but he has 2 interceptions, and he's fumbled the ball 3 times. I think Cleveland would like to rely on the run game, but that's going to be challenging given all the injuries they've had over the last couple of weeks. We all know the terrible Nick Chubb injury that happened on Monday night. Absolutely brutal to see him go out for the season. He's definitely one of the most fun players we've had in the league over the last few years. So that was definitely tough. They also have Jack Conklin out for, I think, the year, their right tackle, who's been a stud for them for quite a while now. So if they're not going to be able to run the ball, and you have Watson who's going to attempt to throw the ball, but it's probably not going to go well. I just don't see how Cleveland's going to be able to put up much offensively on the scoreboard. So when you're getting 3 and the hook with Tennessee, even though I don't really love their offense either, it's hard to pass on that. And then you definitely just have to take the under on this one. I mean, Tennessee is also a run first team, and they're going up against a Browns defense that is also very good against the run. They're actually tied with Tennessee for the third fewest rushing yards allowed. Uh, Cleveland also has the third fewest passing yards allowed this season at just 267. A lot of that came in week 1 when they completely shut down Joe Burrow, and they also did pretty well against Kenny Pickett last week. I just don't think either team is going to be able to move the ball. I think in order to hit the 39.5, you're going to have one team hit mid to high 20s, and I'm just not seeing that happen in this game. So definitely taking the under. I got to take Tennessee with 3 in the hook. I'm going to trust Tannehill and Derrick Henry way more than Deshaun Watson and Jerome Ford. It's not going to be pretty in this one.
Yeah, and we talk about it all the time. When you have conservative offenses, like very run heavy offenses, regardless of how the game flow kind of goes, especially like Tennessee, especially like Cleveland has been, uh, that just decreases the number of possessions in the game. And when you have fewer possessions, it's harder to score more points. That's why this number is obviously lower at 39.5. And, we kind of tend to look at that 40 line as being the break point to, okay, this is a pretty low total. But frankly, these are two defenses that are significantly the strengths, or I shouldn't say significantly. The Tennessee defense has played well this year, which isn't usually their forte. That's kind of where they've fallen flat. At least that's where they fell flat last year. But they've been playing decently well. They have the 11th best points per game allowed, 20. Um, the Cleveland, I mean, everybody knows about how good Cleveland's defense is. Myles Garrett is an absolute force to be reckoned with. I know
Yep.
that there was a big argument started this week between, Steelers Twitter and Browns Twitter about TJ Watt versus Myles Garrett. And, you know, they're both elite pass rushers. And we'll get into TJ Watt probably a little bit later. But when you have guys like that affect the game, it makes it pretty hard to put points on the board with both of these teams being such conservative offenses. And like you said, with Nick Chubb's brutal injury, which, by the way, sports media world, please stop putting these videos online. I don't need to scroll my timeline when it happens and see it 14 different times in 5 different angles.
Yeah.
Like, I don't. We can get the message that it was bad. That's all they have to convey, and they don't need to continue to show us that. And with that being said, my well wishes in heart goes out to Nick Chubb, because that looked absolutely brutal. We're hoping him a good recovery, because the last time I saw an injury that bad was Marshawn Lattimore back in the day, or Marcus Lattimore back in the day for South Carolina, when he absolutely flapped his knee, and he was supposed to be the second coming of Adrian Peterson. So, I guess we'll see. I really hope that he does make a full recovery, though, because like you said, you hit the nail on the head. He is one of the most fun backs to watch in the game, and quietly the most consistent back over the last 5 years since he's come in the league. So now they get Hunt. So we'll see. He's familiar with the offense. He should be comfortable. They should be able to kind of not miss too much of a beat, because Kareem Hunt is still a very good back. But even still, that's a downgrade, in my opinion. You can't just replace what Hunt does, or what Chubb was doing on the field. And then specifically, you hit it on the head too. Deshaun Watson has not been worth up the bill.
Not even close.
64.2 PFF pass grade. I get it that it's just 2 games and maybe their offensive scheme doesn't really equate to him making huge plays, but he has looked bad. He looks like he processes slow. He looks like he's uncomfortable. And it's like, yeah, it was kind of an excuse when you were new there. You've had time to get acclimated. You're a former MVP. Something's got to give. And right now it's just not happening. And frankly, maybe it's not all on him, because that wide receiver core, if you go and watch any of those games, any of the coaches film on any of those games, those guys just don't really get a ton of separation. He's even delivering some good balls that guys just aren't being able to get to, or aren't really making a great play on. And that's a tough look also. But at the end of the day, something's got to give. And you know what? Tennessee, they played really good against the Chargers last week, covered as road favorites, one of 9 undefeated teams against the spread this year. I'm taking Tennessee too. So
Yep.
I'm right there with you. The next game we have on the slate, though, it's okay. We're going to get the abuse out early.
Ooh,
The abuse out early. And
let's do it.
funny enough, we both have this game on the exact same side. So we're both here taking the Miami Dolphins are -6 at home against the Denver Broncos. And anybody that knows this show obviously knows that this is a touchy subject for me, especially after last week, where they haven't hit any of these overs and then all of a sudden hit an over and lose the game at the end. Like, I
Oh
had
my
to
goodness.
just to preface this. So I was watching the game and I'm, messaging some buddies. I have to go off and do something for work. So I was away from the TV for a second. I come back maybe 15 minutes later, longer than I had hoped, but I come back maybe 15 minutes later, the entire game is turned. It's out of hand. It looks like a completely different team. I just don't know what to make of this. The team flat out does not finish games. The defense used to be their really strong point, and now the defense looks suspect on a lot of occasions. Not to mention they're going to be out with Justin Simmons is projected to be out this week as well. For me, this is a strange matchup where I'm not really sure why it's 6.5 and not maybe 7, because the full touchdown in my mind makes more sense. And I think that half point right here is a huge value. So one tidbit for this game is the weather looks nasty. Rain, thunder, high percentage chances, the tropical storm over on the coast or whatever has kind of been causing some mayhem. Um, but like we just said, Denver looks gross. They can't put together a game. And their run defense for me has been an extremely suspect part of them, because that's actually been something they've been decently well at. They might be only allowing 3.5 yards per carry, but last week against the Commanders, they allowed 5.3 per carry. Justin Simmons, one of their better run defenders, one of their more consistent defenders, period. He's going to be out. But when we look at Miami, everybody thought Miami is, we're going to throw it all over. We're only going to throw the ball. Look what they did last week. Raheem Mostert had six to. I said Mostert. Shout out Jack Kavanaugh. Raheem Mostert, he had 6.7 per touch or per carry last week. He looked amazing. And he is a talented back. We've seen what he can do in other offenses. And this Dolphins run game has been a run game of revolving heads for a while. It seems like they found their dude now. And if they can do that against the Broncos, I'm really excited for the prospects of what they could do. And now, if it clears up enough and it's not super rainy and they can throw the ball around, yeah, I don't think 6.5 is anywhere close. But if they have to run it, I think it might be closer, but I still like that half point, and I'm taking the Dolphins, and I'm liking Raheem Mostert over 57.5 rushing yards. That just seems like it's a little bit of a high number just because you're not entirely sure all the time. Dolphins backs don't always get that type of workload, but I think that's a reasonable number for him to hit here. What are you seeing with this matchup, V? And remember, I am still right here, so don't down the Broncos too bad. No, I'm just kidding. Do your thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's tough start for them. You have 2 home games against the Raiders and the Commanders, and you go 0-2. Now you got a bunch of road games. Not a great start, but let's start with Miami in this game. I mean, you said it. They've been fantastic so far this year. I think they're the best offense in the league through 2 weeks. Tua is the betting favorite for MVP. You brought that up, I think, a couple of shows ago. He's been just unstoppable so far. 715 passing yards, 4 touchdowns in 2 games. And the crazy thing about Tua, he leads the league in the lowest average time to throw at around 2.3 seconds, but he's second in the league in air yards per attempt. That is an insane combo that you just never see. That means he gets the ball out insanely quickly and he gets it down the field to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. You just don't see that ever in this league. And even he's getting the ball out so quickly, he's only been sacked 1 time this year. I think for most of us, that was the biggest concern for the Dolphins heading into the year was, can they keep Tua upright? And if not, then their season is going to go down the toilet. But if they can keep him upright, they have plenty of talent to not only compete in that division, but honestly compete in the conference and in the whole league. So if he's getting the ball up that quickly, then this is going to be a very, very difficult team to stop. One note for Miami's offense is Jalen Waddle is dealing with a concussion this week, but he did practice limitedly today, so it looks like he could be on track to play. That's obviously huge for their offense. Now getting to Denver, I mean, what can we really say? It's just been super inconsistent on both sides of the ball. Week 1, you had a pretty bad offensive performance, but the defense looked all right against a not so great Las Vegas team. But then in week 2, it was kind of vice versa. You had a pretty good showing from the offense, multiple touchdowns from Russell Wilson, but then the defense just kind of imploded and let Sam Howell do whatever he wanted. You have Frank Clark and Justin Simmons ruled out for this game. I mean, I just don't see what they can do to stop this Miami offense. I don't know who you can trust. This is also a Vic Fangio revenge game. Let's see what he has dialed up in this one. That'll be interesting to watch. It feels like all factors point to Miami in this one.
Right, and Miami's defense might not be the best defense, but they're definitely not this cratering unit, kind of like what Vance Joseph's defense has been. I think Vic is definitely going to have a chip on his shoulder, and you know what? He probably deserves it. I mean,
Yeah.
he probably has that right. So, and you make a great point. Tua is doing fantastic things, and what this offense does between these two extremely high talented wide receivers, where the New England defense was really keying on Hill, on Tyreek Hill, and they were making his life kind of tough and putting hands on him and really dedicating a lot of attention to him. And it opened up Waddle quite a bit. So with those two on the field, it is a huge, huge stressor on defenses. Now, if Waddle were to miss extended time with a concussion, that would definitely be worrisome. But like you said, he practiced today. He should hopefully be on track to come back. And another thing that's impressed me, which I don't think people talk about enough, but the psyche of a quarterback. And it's something we're going to get into a little bit later when we talk about the Bears and Justin Fields, because I know that I think I don't know that you have a pick on that game, but I have a pick on
Yeah,
that game.
no.
And the interesting thing that a lot of people don't realize is that something like what happened to Tua could really affect how you process information and stay composed in the pocket. And he's had none of that. He has had no
No.
drawbacks, no downfalls of that. That sack that he took, anytime he's taking any of these hits, they talked about how he learned jujitsu to fall better. Well, it looks like he's falling better. Now, obviously, those things happen and they're freak accidents and things like that. Like, it's just how it happens sometimes. But he didn't look skittish. He didn't look like he was quick to escape pockets like some other quarterbacks who might have taken that hit, and he looks good and he's delivering the football really well. And you know what? He might be poised for the MVP this year. So there's still some value there. You might as well go and pick it up because I'm going to probably sprinkle some dollars in there too. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
all right. And into our next game, we did talk about New England, and now we have the Pats. They're at the Jets. This isn't like a super exciting game to a lot of people, but we're kind of weird degenerates and we like defensive football too. So this one here, New England is -2.5 on the road, game total 36.5. And the thing about this one, shocker, East Coast game, gonna be a bunch of rain. Uh, you're on the side of New England here, covering the 2.5. I like your style there. I'm actually on the side of under 36.5, which seems insane because 36.5 is a low number for low numbers. But we'll break into that. I want to get your take on what you're focusing on with New England this week.
This feels like deja vu, to be honest. I felt like we talked about this specific game so much last year because these two teams played twice, and it feels like it's going to be the same exact game all over again. I mean, there's nowhere to start other than Zach Wilson stinks, man. I mean, it is just brutal to watch. There's not much more to say than that. He had 3 interceptions last week. They just could not do anything. Their only positive play was when he hit Garrett Wilson, and Garrett Wilson did most of the work by taking it 60 yards for a touchdown. I mean, they just didn't do anything else besides that. I know they played a tough Dallas defense, but to be honest, New England has been very good on defense as well this year. They held Philadelphia to 25 points and they held Miami to 24 points. And their rookie, Christian Gonzalez, has been like awesome to start the year. He's been rated as one of the better corners in the league, and that's across all corners, not just rookies. So they found a great one in the draft, it seems like so far. And then I'm going to say what I said last week. I think it's still true. Mac Jones is playing better than most people want to admit, given the supporting cast that he has around him. I think he played quite well against Miami. It wasn't easy circumstances, but I think he did all he could. It's going to be a tough matchup against a good Jets defense, but I think they'll be able to lead a couple of scoring drives and put at least a few points up on the board. And to be honest, that's way more than I can say than I expect for Zach Wilson. I don't see him doing anything at all again this week. And I also really like that you're playing the under. There's a lot of injury concerns on the offensive line for both teams. Both teams could be missing a couple of key starters along their line, so could be a lot of sacks, a lot of pressures by the defensive line. So another ugly, bad football game, but you got to take New England when you're getting less than 3.
100%, right? And you hit the nail on the head. And I hate to continue to just beat the dead horse that is Zach Wilson because, like, the poor guy has a family. Like, but where do we draw the line in just absolute inability to process information that's coming at you? Where I get that the NFL game comes really quick, but we are in we're deep into this now.
Yeah.
And there are three certainties in life: death, taxes, and Zach Wilson interceptions. I just don't understand how this team can continue, how Robert Saleh can continue to look his players in the face, continuing to wheel out Zach Wilson. Now, I understand that a lot of that stuff is probably, there's not a lot of better options. What are they going to do? There's rumors of Phillip Rivers wants to come out of
Oh my
retirement.
goodness.
Like, what's
Rough.
happening over there? Frankly, I think the Zach Wilson experiment has obviously long overdone its conclusion, and this team is good enough that they deserve somebody better at the helm. Now, I'm not a fortune teller. I don't know where the options are. I don't know what their GM is doing to make these things happen or to investigate these, but this is a good team. They can't waste this. And one thing that and the reason I'm so passionate about this is because I can't watch our guy Garrett Wilson continue to catch passes from Zach Wilson. He's too damn good. That
Yeah.
catch, honestly, was one of the most impressive catches I've seen in like a number of years. And maybe it's just because I see Garrett Wilson as this talent that would probably be a top, 4 or 5 receiver in the league with a better quarterback. And I was thinking that's what we were going to get this year with Rodgers. But you just hit the nail on the head. And then two just really good defenses. We didn't even really touch on it, but the Jets are still one of the elite defenses in the league. Let's see. And also, just another tidbit that I wrote down out of here: out of these two teams, only one has hit 21 plus points one time.
Wow.
So there you go with that. I get that it's 36 points, but you got rain, you got two good defenses, and you got a middling offense to a bad offense. There's only so much you can do. I think this game
Yeah,
screams under. So
for sure.
next game on the list here, we have Houston traveling to Jacksonville. Jacksonville favored by 8. Looks like 8.5 in some spots. 44.5 points for the total here. And you're actually on the total for this game. You like the over here. And you even have some props I'm seeing for this one. What are you seeing with the Texans in the Jags matchup?
Yeah, well, to start off, I think you mentioned there's might be some weather stuff going on in that part of the country. To be honest, that is not something I've looked into quite yet. So that could play a factor and that cause some changes as we head closer to the game. But going into this game with the assumption that there's not going to be anything too bad going on, I'm taking the over 44.5 in this game. I think these are two offenses that are pretty good and can put up some points in this one. We'll start with Houston first. CJ Stroud is kind of on a bit of a tear right now in 2 games into his career. He is fifth in the league in passing yards at 626 yards, and he is tied for fourth in pass attempts at 91. They are absolutely letting him rip it, and he is succeeding so far through 2 games. And his main target has been Nico Collins, who has 13 catches for 226 yards on 20 targets. I think he's going to have another big game this week. His total receiving yards on this one is only 54.5, which is weirdly low. I think he's going to destroy that number and go way over. It could be another 100-yard game for him. That's one of my favorite prop bets of the week. So I think Houston's going to have not too much trouble putting up, low to mid 20s in this game. Going to Jacksonville, their offense struggled quite a bit last week against a surprisingly good KC defense. I think that's something we might talk about when we talk about Kansas City, Chicago. But KC's defense has been one of the better units in the league this week, in the league this year. But now Jacksonville gets to play a Houston defense that has allowed the 6th most points in the league. They allowed both Anthony Richard and Gardner Minshew to kind of move the ball at will last week. Anthony Richardson had 2 rushing touchdowns in the first quarter, and then Gardner Minshew came in pretty early in that one and really just move the ball up and down the field. Had a passing touchdown in the first half. Houston will be without Jalen Petrie and Derek Stingley in their secondary. So I think this is going to be a massive bounce back game for Trevor Lawrence and that Jacksonville passing attack. I think both offenses are going to move the ball and should definitely hit the over if the weather is not anything too terrible in this one.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. And you want to know the funny thing is this really doesn't have much to do with this game in particular, but just an interaction I had on socials this week when talking about what's happening with the Bears. I know, how do we keep coming back to the Bears? So I'm talking about Justin Fields and the offensive line and kind of the goofy play calling and things like that. And somebody goes, well, and I get like at some point some of it is his fault too, but somebody was like, he just holds the ball so long. It's like if you look at CJ Stroud, he doesn't hold the ball so long. And I just got a huge laugh about like, just say you don't watch the games without saying you don't watch the games. When you look at CJ Stroud, the thing that we needed to know about him was, can he make off-platform plays, and can his system in the NFL actually stick with a game plan where it's quick hitting passes? Let him get the ball out of him, let him make one read, let him operate, and he's done that. He's done fantastic with that. He doesn't hold, he processes quickly. Now, if we start getting to teams that can really pressure him, then we might see something kind of give. I don't know if that's Jacksonville right now, though. So when we say that, I think if you allow a guy like Stroud to be able to cook, well, guess what? That could equal some points for this Texans team, who isn't like, yes, maybe they're not the best team on paper. I will level with you, but they're a team that plays better than they are on paper. And granted, they might not win games at all, really, frankly, but they play better football than they did 12 months ago, this time last year. And now Jacksonville, obviously a really good team. Everybody's high on Jacksonville to win this division. But these are the games that they really have to show up and do something for. And the Texans always come in and play Jacksonville decently well. Now, I don't have the scores offhand. I know somebody's probably going to hit the comments and be like, Mason, what about that time that they beat him by 20? But they come in there, they play them well. Division games tend to be closer, and teams tend to be motivated more in division games. I'm right there with you. I think 44.5 is a really good number. I think that I would take this number all the way up to like 45.5 and maybe even 46. So I'm right there with you. I completely agree. And Nico Collins, 54.5 receiving yards. That's actually a value. That's a huge value. And I feel like it's that low because of name and kind of resume, where he hasn't really done a lot of that, but they've looked good together. They look like they have some chemistry and a connection. So I'm right there with you. I agree.
Yep.
The next game we have on here is actually
could be good, man. Could be pretty good.
This is one of my favorite games of the week.
Yeah.
Atlanta heads into Detroit to play the Lions, and the Lions are favored by a clean 3 points, and it's a perfect 46, almost like the number for like the neutral number for game total and just the neutral number for spread. I like this game a lot. So I'm leaning the side of Atlanta in the points. And I know you're liking the game total. I'll let you break into that here in a second, but I want to break down just a couple of reasons. Really, just mainly one reason that I really, really like the fact, maybe two, like 1.5 reasons.
Are you going to say Sky Camera?
No, but very close. Bijan Robinson, so damn good at football, man. And I know everybody was kind of scratching their head like, hey, you guys ran the ball really well last year. You didn't need another running back. Like, forget all that. Now they have the workhorse. This man is absolutely killing it. So one of the highest rated rushers in the league. He's the highest graded running back in the league, offensive graded running back in the league. Now, he's not maybe the best pass blocker, but he runs like a bat out of hell. He has the fourth most missed tackles in the league, most forced missed tackles in the league so far this year. And the reason why I like that is because Detroit has had trouble tackling this year. They have a 16% missed tackle rate. courtesy of our friends over at Pro Football Focus. Third worst in the NFL, tied for third worst in the NFL. That's pretty alarming. Now, is that the end of the world? No, they're actually decently well at fitting gaps and in playing their assignments. So that's a huge plus, and that makes sense with how they've been coached. But you got to make your tackles. And when you come up against a guy that has a great combination of speed and power and contact balance and vision, like Bijan Robinson has, you're you're just gonna have a long day. He's gonna run over you, he's gonna run around you, he's gonna spin move you, he's gonna stiff arm you, and he's gonna make it look easy. And frankly, when you say that, I think, all right, that brings me to the next part of the game. The Lions. The Lions obviously are an explosive offense. They're an electric offense. And like you just talked about, you know, KC has a pretty decent defense. And the Lions actually held their own against them. But if we come in and say, hey, we're taking out a lot of the possessions in this game, you're not going to be getting the ball back as often as, say, like, Patrick Mahomes, who's thrown it quite a bit. That makes it tougher on the Lions, where they have to execute down in and down out to make the most of all these passing downs that they have. But if we look over on the other side, last year, we talked about this all the time. Atlanta would have been such a better team with like one or two good defensive backs. They were so bad stopping the pass for like 2 years. And we took advantage of that every single week. And we hammered overs on them, and we rode them for like the first 7 weeks of the season, and they went undefeated against the spread because, they ran the ball really well to stay in the game, but then they just always lost it because they couldn't cover anybody. Well, they're covering people pretty well now. Now, they're not like the best, like through advanced statistics and EPA, they aren't the best. They're like middle of the road and EPA allowed for pass plays. But in general volume, they've allowed the second fewest passing yards to only Dallas. Now, that should be a little bit alarming for the Lions. They should definitely game plan to make sure that they can get that chunk yardage they want. But I'm leaning on the side of Atlanta being able to control just a little bit. Now, I know that there's some injuries, and I know that you might probably hit on those here in a second. But I'm liking the points here. V, where are you sitting on your thoughts for this game? I know that you have some skin on the total. So what are you taking for that?
Yeah, definitely taking the over 46 points in this game. Lions at home. We're going back to last year. They are averaging 33 points per game at home. Now you come into this year and home opener last week, and they scored 31 points and they give up 37. I don't know what it is. I think we talked about this a little bit last season, but it seems like it's continuing again. Whenever they're at home, it's just always going to be a shootout. It's crazy, but it's always entertaining to watch. I think it's going to be the same again this week. They're going up against an Atlanta defense that like you said, they were solid in terms of passing yards, but they did give up 3 touchdowns. So Jordan Love last week, he kind of had his way in the red zone against them. Previous week, they played Bryce Young, who not had a great start to the year. So I'm not really going to count that game, but they did give up 3 to Jordan Love last week. I think there'll be room for Jared Goff to maneuver and at least get some touchdown passes in this one. Detroit has a couple wide receivers listed as questionable going into this game, including Amon-Ra St. Brown and Josh Reynolds. But it looks like they should be expected to play. If either of them is out, especially Amon-Ra St. Brown, then maybe we can revisit this total. But assuming they're going to play, I definitely still like the over for them. And then Detroit's defense continues to be suspect, especially with C.J. Gardner-Johnson now expected to miss the season with a torn pec. Kirby Joseph and Emmanuel Mosley have been ruled out in this one. So I think it could be a pretty decent Desmond Ridder game, who has not been as bad as I thought he was going to be coming into the season. He had 237 passing yards last week and 2 touchdowns. He probably should have had a handful of turnovers, but Green Bay secondary couldn't really get their hands on him, or they dropped a few of them. But just in general, I think he's looked a little better than I thought. And then obviously you have to talk about Bijan Robinson, who just looks unstoppable. You mentioned all of the stats. That Skycam video, though, of him running and just juking out all the Packers defenders from last week, that was unbelievable to watch. I watched that like 100 times this week. One of the coolest things I've seen. I just think there's going to be a lot of points in this game. I don't really trust either defense right now, and both offenses look pretty solid.
the way that video keys the ball, how it focuses ball
Yeah.
center screen the entire way. Like at first your brain's like, wait, why is it doing that? And then you realize that the ball doesn't move from the center
Yeah.
of the screen the entire time. And wow, honestly, shout out to the production quality on that. It's an amazing run, but the video itself, I think, is just insane. It's just
Yep.
absolutely incredible. So yeah, and I think that we're right there, kind of in the same boat. So my only thinking with the Green Bay type thing, especially on the secondary, is that they got kind of put into some good positions for those essentially because their defense has played a little bit better. I think that this game is going to be a little different for Detroit because like we said, Detroit's super suspect defensively. And
Yeah.
now, like, it's weird because they're good in some aspects, but then just like really bad in others, and it makes them kind of middling and kind of like a question mark throughout this whole thing. So, like we said, this is actually going to be one of the more interesting matchups through two teams that, you know, could be making the playoffs this year. So, I'm excited to see it shake out. And of course, everybody keep locked in with us. Keep tabs on this because we're going to be following this one all the way up to kickoff for the injury report because like you said, those two injuries at wide receiver are really going to be a crucial point to this total for sure.
Yep.
Regardless of whichever direction you decide to take it because either way there can be value on this line. Just kind of the nature of where it came out at. Generally 45 or 46 and a half are kind of that idea where it's like it's a 50-50 on if it can go above or below, kind of. So another game, speaking of the Packers. So the Saints head into Green Bay to take on the Packers is actually going to be nice in Green Bay. Lucky for the Saints. They are never mind. That has the wrong spread at the top right there. If anybody from Betting Pros ends up seeing this, you guys have a little issue there. Green Bay favored by a point here. 42 and a half is the total. And we have a little bit of skin on each side of this, or not on each side of this, but on a little bit of each different piece. You're looking at the under on the 42 and a half for the game total, which I'm right there with you. I love that. I'm on Green Bay minus 1.5, and it's so strange. But when you look at just kind of like the trends for this game, now I understand that Green Bay was a road dog both games, again at Chicago and at Atlanta, but they won both of those. Or they didn't win.
They
Wait,
lost last week.
no, they
Yeah.
lost Atlanta. Okay. But it was close. It was a closer one, but they were road dogs, so they ended up covering. So they are the only undefeated, or I shouldn't say only undefeated. They are one of the only undefeated teams against the spread in the league this season. On the other side, the Saints, while they were at home versus Tennessee, at Carolina, favorites both times, well, they're winless against the spread. So it's kind of like opposite records for opposite circumstances, which kind of makes it a hard game to read, which is why the game is -1. But the way that Green Bay's played, like, Love hasn't been fantastic by any means. I think he had like 157 yards last week, but 3 touchdowns. It's kind
Yeah.
of like they make the plays that need to be made and nothing more. So when we look at that now, granted, there's a lot of injuries for this game. Bakhtiari's questionable, Jair Alexander's questionable, Aaron Jones, Christian Watson. All these guys are questionable or, potentially coming back this week. On the other side, Jamal Williams is out. So there's questions all over the field on really kind of the ball carriers and specifically for Green Bay. Now, if these guys don't end up playing, I'm probably not super excited to be taking them at -1. But if they do end up playing, I think you get a significant discount at -1 because guys like Aaron Jones, Christian Watson's played decently well. I don't know that the Saints like have those type of weapons right now. They just look kind of anemic on offense. Uh, I don't know. What's your read on this game? I feel like picking your brain on this will kind of help me to clear my own mind because when I read this, I like Green Bay because of how well they've played against kind of middling teams, but then again, it's just a hard read. So what are you seeing with this matchup?
Yeah, I have some question marks on both offenses heading into this game. That's why I like the under 42.5 in this one. Derek Carr and the New Orleans Saints offense have not been very good to start the year. They have a total of just 3 touchdowns in 2 weeks. Carr has 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions in 2 games. I don't think that's really what they were expecting when they brought him in this offseason. But despite their offense not being terrific, their defense has been quite good. They have allowed the fourth fewest total yards and the fourth fewest points per game so far this year. Granted, they played the Tennessee Titans and the Carolina Panthers, so they haven't faced world beaters. But I think going up against this Green Bay offense could be another good opportunity for this Saints defense to have a good game. Love has been, I mean, he's been solid touchdown wise, at least for the first 2 weeks. I mean, he has 6 touchdowns, no turnovers. That's incredibly impressive for just his second and third starts for his career. One of the reasons he's had that success, though, is that he has not faced very much pressure at all this year. His offensive line has done a terrific job blocking for him. He's their bottom 5 in pressure rate allowed. But despite facing limited pressure, Jordan Love is near the bottom of the league in completion percentage over expected. So even though he's completing some passes and getting some touchdowns, he's still not completing as many passes as the metrics would say he should. And I think he's going to be facing his toughest test of the season so far, going up against the Saints defense that is miles better than either the Chicago defense or the Atlanta defense. They'll also be without Elton Jenkins. Their left guard for Green Bay has been ruled out. So I think there could be some pressure in Jordan Love's face this week for the first time this year. I just don't see either offense being able to do much. I think there's going to be a stagnant defensive game, and we'll see which quarterback can kind of come out on top. I wouldn't be surprised if it is Jordan Love. So that -1 is not a bad play, just given how bad Derek Carr has kind of played the first couple weeks of the season.
Yeah, this is not one that's going to pop up on Red Zone very often.
No.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So I'm right there with you. I agree. I think 42 is, or 42.5 is a huge value here on that. And I completely agree. Completely agree. The next game we have on the slate here, Buffalo going to the nation's capital to take on the Commanders. They are 6.5-point favorites on the road in V. You are planting your flag and you are taking the Commanders and the points 6.5 right up the ticket. Tell the people what you're processing on this one.
Well, this is like maybe sneaky the best game on the slate this weekend. I think this could be a ton of fun. Let's first start out with Washington, and let's talk about the hiring of Eric Bieniemy. That looks like the best offseason coaching move for the offseason so far. They've been terrific on offense through 2 weeks. Sam Howell has looked way better than anybody expected. 500 passing yards, 4 total touchdowns in 2 games. He looks just super comfortable out there. There's a lot of great breakdowns of the all 22 this week, especially that touchdown to Terry McLaurin last week where he threw it over 3 guys and McLaurin just came down with it. That was great job all around. And maybe even more surprising is kind of the contribution they're getting from Brian Robinson in both the running game and the passing game. I think we kind of passed over him given how inefficient they were running the ball last year, but he's been very solid to start the year. 195 total yards and 3 total touchdowns for him to start the season. And then the big thing that we were expecting them to do last year, but didn't really happen, was the dominant play of their defensive line. Montez Sweat, Chase Young, Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne, all these guys are playing out of their minds right now. They're tied for first with Dallas with 10 sacks so far this year. So they've just been eating all over the place. But unfortunately, they're going up against Josh Allen, who looked much, much better last week as compared to week 1, where he had the turnovers and kind of looked like his old self from Wyoming in the early parts of his Buffalo career. And man, it's scary to bet against this guy. This is not one that I necessarily feel great about. I'm going to be kind of closing my eyes. I'm going to be scared the whole time, but it just feels like too much value. He has been vulnerable to pressure this year. He's been sacked 7 times. So I feel like if this defensive line can continue to play well and get to him, this game is going to be much closer than this line indicates. I just feel like 6.5 is too many points. This should be a much closer game coming down to the end of the fourth quarter, and I really would not be surprised to see Washington win this one at home. That's how good I think their offense is playing and how much I like their defensive line.
Well, and another like just general, rule of thumb that we always talk about. If this game is 6.5 points with Washington at home, odds makers are essentially saying that it's 9.5 points in Buffalo.
Yeah.
I don't I don't see that value. And if that doesn't make sense to you, then the other way shouldn't make sense to you, frankly. So I'm right there with you with as scary as it is 6.5, you know, that defensive line specifically, I wish that I had wrote it down because that's something that I was looking at right before this too when we were prepping. Is they have an obscenely high win rate, defensive pressure
Yeah.
win rate against pass protection. Just a stupid high number because all of those guys, you only have 5 blockers. If one of them needs a double, the other 3 are one-on-one. And it's
Yep.
a tough road to sit there and continue to dedicate more and more help to covering these guys up, that one of them is just going to break through, and they continue to really eat. The whole group eats. They all are extremely dominant players, and they look really good, and they're the strength of that team without a doubt. And the offense is just good enough to get it all done and
Yeah.
just good enough to really tie it all together. And part of that is that they're running the ball pretty well. Brian Robinson is playing good ball. Like I said, the Broncos allowed, what was it, 5.6 per touch to him last week. It's kind of stupid what they ended up doing. So I lean with it too. I think that sometimes when we look at Josh Allen, it's so hard because you do see shades of that guy that everybody counted out through the first year and a half of his career or whatever. You see shades of that at points, and we've seen it probably almost as much as we've seen the elite play over like his last 6 games or whatever, going back to last season, because he tailed off at the end of last season, maybe not including the playoffs, but like into uh the tail end of the regular season. They kind of limped into where they got to, and he was part of that. So I'm excited to see it happen. You're right. This is actually a low key, pretty exciting game for the week.
For sure.
Our one obligatory headphone drop. I just need to get wireless ones, man.
Yeah.
Okay. Next game on the schedule. So that was the last game for the early slate. So if anybody has your little early slate parlays, go ahead and cut that right there. And now we head into the later slate. The first game on the list, we have Carolina heading into Seattle. And I'm on both ends of this one with the total. Seattle is minus 5.5. 42 points is the total. I don't understand how this game isn't a touchdown. I just don't. And you know what? We talk about it all the time at 5.5. From a better standpoint, that is a touchdown. But just from like a principle of a standpoint, why? I don't get that. And we say this all the time, V. This is more of a bet against Carolina than it is so much for Seattle. Now, don't get me wrong. Seattle's been good. Seattle's made us a bunch of money, especially last year with their overachieving. They've been kind of wishy-washy this year, kind of to a degree, but I think part of that might have been that week 1 matchup with LA. LA might be better than a lot of people pegged. And so when we look at Seattle through that lens, I think Seattle still a really good team. Nobody can block Aaron Donald anyway, and they're coming up against Carolina that it's just like, what
Rough,
are they
man.
doing? What are
It's
they
rough.
doing over here? Carolina has the lowest scoring offense in the league. Well, tied for the lowest scoring offense in the league, 13.5 points per game. Bryce Young out, Andy Dalton starting this week. I'm not entirely sure that rights the ship. Like everybody else wants to be like, oh yeah, like that's way better because hasn't been atrocious. Like, don't get me wrong, Bryce Young has not been good at football, but there is a reason that they took a quarterback first overall and weren't riding with Andy Dalton. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So when you look at that, I don't know that there's a lot to be had here. And part of it is go and look at these wide receivers play. If you go into YouTube and search like Carolina coaches film, you're not going to get a ton of like stuff, but if you go out and kind of look at the broadcast and see just like when the game pans back over, you're going to see none of these guys have any separation. None of these targets have any separation. And if you don't, if you can't find that film, just take my word for it because I watched every single passing snap and couldn't believe that there's never any separation anywhere from any of those receivers. And now that's why I kind of lean to like, all right, Bryce, you need to be better, but it's not all on you. This team in general, though, has a lot of dysfunction. And I'm probably going to be betting against them for a while, especially if they continue to be under touchdown favorites or underdogs to teams that are actually fairly good on offense, like Seattle. So 5.5 doesn't scare me. They could go to 6.5. I'm still taking Seattle. The thing that's kind of question though, just on the surface, V, and maybe tell me if I'm insane here. I'm leaning under the game total too at 42. And it's kind of the principle that we always have that it takes two to tango. I just
Yep.
don't see Carolina putting up more than like 13 points. And like Seattle might not be like the best defense, but they are an opportunistic defense. They do make plays when they need them. And I think that is just going to be clean pickings for them to, get what they want out of Carolina and come away with a 7-point win. And it's 28-10 or something like that. But then part of me goes, Seattle's going to score 45. And you're
Yeah.
like, oh no. So what do you see anything? Do you have any other input on this matchup? I know you don't have any picks in particular for this one, but what's your kind of quick breakdown on these two?
Yeah, well, the look ahead line on this game was Seattle -4, and I was so ready to pounce all over that number. Unfortunately, it moved up throughout the week and it kind of hit 6.5, 6, 5.5 range. And I kind of found some other picks I liked better, but I was really ready to take Seattle. And, I bet against Carolina the first 2 weeks of the year. It's gone okay. That was an unfortunate push on Monday night, despite New Orleans being up 11 with like no time left. Carolina somehow getting the touchdown on the 2-point conversion. That was frustrating, but yeah, this is a terrible Carolina team. I will continue to be betting against them all season because their skill group is not going to get better. This is not a good skill position group. You're talking Adam Thielen, DJ Chark, Hayden Hurst, Jonathan Mingo. I mean, this is not a good group, and they're going to have tough opponents. They're going to have tough matchups. They're not going to be able to move the ball. So, I mean, yeah, I think you're right. As long as that line is below a touchdown, you're just going to kind of have to fade them every week until they prove that they can do something. They have Josh McCown in there. I think he's calling plays, but he's a relatively new coach, so there's going to be a learning curve for him too. There's just a lot of learning going on, I would say, in Carolina, and that's fine for them. This is a rebuilding process. It's not like at the end of the world that they're going to struggle right now. But if we're talking about in terms of betting, like you just got to fade them until they prove they can play football.
Yeah, and it's like a whole team thing. It's not just like they're not playing well in the pass game. Uh, you know, run it. Miles Sanders hasn't been very good either. Their defense hasn't been
I
very
think
good
Chuba
either.
Hubbard's going to take that job very
And
soon.
yeah, Chuba Hubbard's about to be the back there, and we all know anybody that's played fantasy football over the last couple of years knows about what's up with Chuba Hubbard about
Yeah.
you know his kind of just I don't even know what to make of that. Just head scratching this sometimes he's the best back in the league looks like and sometimes he just can't find a hole. But yeah, I'm right there with you you're right there with me. I think that we all agree fade Carolina until until they prove otherwise.
Yep.
All right. It just comes that time of the show B where we
Yep.
have to we had to kick the Broncos, now we got to kick the Bears a little bit. So Chicago heads into KC to take on the Chiefs. Chiefs minus 12.5 here. 48.5 or 48 in some spots for the game total. I'm leaning on the under. Now, not to continue to just use the same line, but it takes two to tango. Now the Bears, granted, they can kind of stumble into points as they've scored, 20. And they don't but it just looks like the ugliest 20 ever. Like it looks so bad at points that my own brain, when we did a show a couple weeks or when we did the show last week, just Freudian slipped and said that they got shut out, even though they got blown out. I thought they got shut out because that's just how
Same
it
thing for
felt.
them, right?
It's how it
Yeah.
felt watching it. And so when we look at these teams, the thing that's actually more surprising, which is why that I leaned this way even more. And you said it a little bit earlier. KC's actually been pretty good on defense. And
Yep.
frankly, they've had a little bit of a question on offense. So, of both of these teams, we did this exercise just a second ago. Both of these teams have yet to hit 21 in a game this season. And part of that, is because the Chiefs haven't really had to, because they've played, rather good defense for kind of their resume or their like MO. They want to win the
Mhm.
game by, throwing it all over and, you know, boat racing every team that they play, but their defense has been probably their stronger point up to this point. On the other side of the field, V, this is a safe place. I'll give you your moment and you can just kind of have a vent about the Bears, but this has been the craziest news week I've ever seen for a single football franchise. For them to have the game that they put out and then the comments that Fields had about the offense, which he's not wrong. And granted, maybe you shouldn't have necessarily, like, I get that he had an entire soliloquy that he kind of like went on about, and people picked the head that the news or whatever, the three-letter networks picked the headline out that
Yep.
it could be coaching. Like, that's the only thing that they took out, as opposed to, like, that's the most, if you listen to what he was saying, that's one of the most throwaway lines of the entire quote. Like,
For
he was
sure,
blaming everything. Like, he's
including
blaming
himself.
himself. He's blaming his processing. He's blaming the offense. He's blaming the play calling. He's blaming, I maybe those are the type of things you should do behind closed doors. Whatever. I'm not going to be the one to judge him on that. But something's going on there where we talked about this a little behind the scenes, where you asked, I don't know if it's the worst part or the best part of my week to watch JT
QB
O'Sullivan's
school. Yeah.
quarterback school, where he breaks down the Bears every week. Last week's episode, or 2 weeks episode, the episode 2 weeks ago was an hour long. The episode this week was an hour and a half long, and it's just a dumpster fire to watch. And
Yep.
I can't take my eyes off of it because, JT's a smart guy. If he can't figure out what you're trying to do offensively, like, I'm not going to say, like, maybe there's no rhyme or reason to it. I'm not sitting in their meeting rooms. I don't know what their game plans are. I don't come up with that. But if I sitting there and I'm not like the smartest football mind, but I know a little bit about football. If I'm sitting there going, wait a second, what are they trying to do here? And then ex quarterbacks are going, wait a second, what are they trying to do here?
Yeah.
Something's wrong.
For
Something's
sure.
the matter. And that's a huge issue. And that's just on the field. That has nothing to do with like the human part of like what happens when there's a bunch of crazy shit happening all around you, like the team's defensive coordinator abruptly resigning, and again, like the FBI involved, like
Craziness, man.
reports running out that Hallis Hall was raided, and, and like they have to come out and say no, yet this guy has a lawyer. And listen, I don't know what happened. I don't begin to know what happened, but all I'm going to say is that your players in the building see that. They see things like that happen and they go, what's happening here? And they get uncomfortable, and then you're not going to play as well because things aren't about focusing on football. And then just to add the cherry on top, somebody had to pop open the freaking gate and steal the groundskeeping equipment. Imagine somebody pulling up there with a little like flatbed trailer and just driving all of the lawnmowers on there. Somebody goes, "Hey, are you supposed to be here?" He's like, "Maintenance. I'm just here for maintenance on the lawnmowers." That's just the perfect cap to a crazy week for the Bears. So, granted, I think that pencils the Bears in for a good 3 to 6 points against a decent Kansas City defense. Now, Kansas City, are they perfectly capable of throwing up 43 on the Bears? Sure. Have they quite shown that this year, that they're just like a walking, 40-point monster offensive performance? No, I don't think so. And so when I see that, I'm leaning at under, because 48.5 is kind of a high number for any game involving the Bears. and I'm
Yep.
going to lean that way. V, this is a safe space. Well, not entirely, so keep your head on a swivel. Do you have anything you want to say about your Bears, Kansas City, or this game we got coming up?
You covered it well, man. You followed as much as I did. This was a crazy, crazy week. Hey, man, if you're going to be bad, at least be extremely entertaining and give us all the juicy gossip. We got that this week. Honestly, anything less going forward is going to be a disappointment. If we don't have coaches resigning, FBI raids, players making crazy comments every week for the rest of the season, I don't want to watch because that's what's the point, to be honest. But when this line first came out, it was around 47 on the total, and I was with you. I kind of penciled down the under. It was going to be one of my plays this week. I was kind of right there with you that I didn't think Chicago's offense was going to do anything, and that Casey's offense has struggled so far this year. But as the week has gone on, I've kind of seeing a score in my head like 38-17. Like that would not surprise me where Kansas City can put up high 30s, low 40s, like you said. Um, the thing is like we the talk of Chicago for the last couple of weeks has been how bad their offense is, but let's focus on how bad their defense has been so far through 2 games as well. You hire a defensive guy in Matt Eberflus to be your head coach, and I think they've gone 12 straight games going back to last year where they've allowed 25 plus points, and they've lost all of those games. I think that's like a record in the NFL. People are talking about it this week. You could understand it last year why their defense is so bad despite having a defensive minded head coach, just because of the lack of talent, and like their best players were traded away in the middle of last year, including Roquan Smith, Robert Quinn. Those guys got traded. But then you go into this offseason and you spend a ton of money, and there's a ton of draft capital spent on this defense. And you talk about Tremaine Edmonds, TJ Edwards, Yannick Ngakoue, DeMarcus Walker. All these guys were paid pretty well coming to this year. And then you've also spent a ton of draft picks on their defense. You have 4 second-round picks in your secondary, including Kyler Gordon, Jalen Johnson, Jaquan Brisker, and the rookie Tyreek Stevenson. You have a couple of day 2 picks on your defensive line as rookies, and Jervon Dexter and Zach Piggins. And to be honest, these guys are not doing anything. Like there's not one guy on this defense who you can talk about as a star, as a corner piece of this defense going forward. Like there's not one guy in here who you can say comfortably, I want this guy to be on a second contract and be on this team forever. They're just not playing well. And now you're going to go up against Patrick Mahomes. It's just not going to go well. Like there can't be any expectation that you're going to be able to slow him down. Yes, they have not looked good through 2 weeks on that Kansas City offense, but there is no better recipe to get your offense right than playing this
Than
Chicago
playing the
defense
Bears.
and playing the Bears. I mean, this team has 1 sack in 2 games. Like you can't
Yeah.
do that against Patrick Mahomes. One of the crazier advanced stats that you look at for Patrick Mahomes throughout his career is that he is consistently one of the most pressured quarterbacks in the league, but he also takes the fewest sacks in the league. He is just a master in the pocket. So if you're not even going to be able to pressure him, you have no chance of slowing them down or sacking him or doing anything. So I can easily see this being a 38 to 40 point game for Kansas City, and then all it takes is like 10 points for Chicago, and you can kind of hit the over, which is why I kind of decided to pick some other spots in terms of my totals this week. But I think you're definitely right. It takes 2 to tango in Chicago. You can't expect them to do their part offensively. So you're really just expecting Casey to do well. So maybe the better play is just to take Kansas City's team total, whatever that number is, and just take the over on that, because that should hit pretty nicely in this one.
Yeah, that might be a good draw, because you do raise a good point. They are horrendously bad. I think maybe at one point we can just hope that they take pity on them. I was thinking about it. Did they do the in-season Hard Knocks this year?
They might. I don't know if that's been announced yet, if they are doing it this year.
Okay, because I was gonna say I don't think I've seen anything announcing anything like it. And if they have, and if it's not the Bears, they messed up, because
That'd be quite entertaining for sure.
Man, I really can't wait to see. Even if it becomes a Netflix documentary later on down the road, I can't wait to see it. So
How disappointing is it now that Justin Fields said he wasn't going to do season 2 of QB on Netflix? If they had done that for this season, oh my goodness, that would be the number 1 watch show on Netflix for sure.
It would have been so good. It would have been so
Let's
good.
pray he was lying and that they've actually already started filming.
He might have. I would hope. Maybe he's like, well, the contract came through, so that's not until next year. But I didn't want to say anything. We can only hope. At the end of the day, money talks. So we'll see. We'll see. So we head into that's the end of the late slate for us. So if you guys have anything on the late slate that we didn't touch, hit us up in the Discord and we're happy to break some of the games down in there. Sunday night football. Not a great matchup, but
Terrible.
there's a lot of value here, at least for us, I think. I think we as handicappers, I think might be higher on Pittsburgh than most other handicappers out there. And I guess I can kind of get it. But then again, when you watch that team, they just don't give in. And that's kind of like how really good coach teams are, is that they're usually going to reach you know, their best more often than they kind of crumble when things are going well. You know what I mean? That's kind of the way that I think of it. So when we have Pittsburgh heading into Vegas to take on the Raiders, Raiders are -2.5 at home. The game total on this is 43. You know what? I'll let you start because we have
Okay.
a ton on this, and I know you have like pretty much everything under the sun here.
Yep.
So we're both leaning towards Pittsburgh +2.5. I even
Yep.
like the money line here at +127. What else are you identifying here as some pretty high value moments? Because I see them too, and I'm right there with you.
Yeah, I definitely like Pittsburgh to cover at +2.5, and I like the under on 43 points. There's been a lot of talk this week in Pittsburgh about Matt Canada and Kenny Pickett. I think if Chicago wasn't as big of a dumpster fire as they are, I think the talk of the national media would be about Matt Canada and his play calling and whether Pittsburgh should do something else for an offensive coordinator. But I don't know much about him, and I'm not really going to like try to defend him. But all I'm going to say is that they've had a very difficult schedule to start the year. They've had to play San Francisco and they've had to play Cleveland, two of the better defenses in the league so far this year. That's just a tough start to the year, and I don't know if we should necessarily write the story on Pittsburgh just based on those two games. It's just a tough slate, but now you get to play a much easier Las Vegas defense that just got torched for 38 points by Buffalo last week. The Raiders have allowed the second most passing touchdowns in the league with 5 so far, and they've allowed the seventh most rushing yards per game. They have just 4 sacks on the season. I think this is going to be a much better Kenny Pickett game and a much better game for this offense. I think they'll have room to operate, room to throw, room to run. I think it's going to look cleaner. These guys are going to look more comfortable. It's going to be a better all around game. And I also have a prop I like for Pittsburgh's offense. I like the over 2.5 receptions for Jalen Warren, who is their backup running back, but he has looked significantly better so far this season than Najee Harris. Jalen Warren has 9 catches on the year as compared to 3 for Najee, and Warren has just been far more explosive. You could definitely see him taking over as a starting back for this team if Najee doesn't get better. They're going up against a Raiders defense that has allowed 14 catches to running backs through 2 games. That is a crazy high amount. Samaje Perine and Javonte Williams did well in week 1, and then last week James Cook and Latavius Murray had their way in the receiving game as well. So definitely like over 2.5 receptions for Jalen Warren. And then on the other side of the ball, Pittsburgh's defense struggled, I think, in the first half against San Francisco, where they gave up a couple touchdowns to Brandon Ayuk. But in the 6 quarters since then, they've only allowed 3 total touchdowns, and a couple of them were off of short fields because of turnovers by Pittsburgh's offense. I just don't see Las Vegas being able to do much against this incredible defensive line. TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, all these guys, I think they're going to be up Jimmy G's face and just kind of beat him up. And then I just think it's going to be a low scoring affair. There's not going to be much going on for Las Vegas's offense, and then Pittsburgh's offense. They have some stuff to work on. I think it'll be better, but it's not going to be like a high scoring affair. They're not going to hit 30 or anything in this game. So a couple low scoring teams, but Pittsburgh is definitely the much better team in this one.
Well, yeah, I think you hit it on the head. So those first couple quarters, San Francisco is looking like one of the best teams in the league right now. And then, but Pittsburgh kind of answered well, I felt like. At least
Yeah.
you know, they answered back this past week. Uh, played a really good game against the Browns, ended up coming out to winning that one. When we look on the other side, the Raiders just haven't put up that type of resume to be, 3 points, 2.5 point favorites, 3 point favorites, even at home
Mhm.
against a team
Yeah.
like Pittsburgh. Because if you look at what the Raiders did, okay, they came in 1 point win against a lowly Broncos team. Think about that as like your comparator towards like a middling to mediocre opponent. And then they got 10 against Buffalo. Look at that as your comparator towards like a really good high end and elite opponent. And you have a 7 point spread to a 10, 17-10. That's just like your MO is that we're middling against bad teams and we're very bad against good teams. Now, I wouldn't necessarily put Pittsburgh in the really good teams era or anything like that, but I would definitely put them in above average in how they, especially when you look at kind of how they can pressure passers and things like that. TJ Watt is an absolute menace. Now, there was obviously a lot of uproar. Kind of started from some friends of mine over at PFF about the Myles Garrett versus TJ Watt debate. And at the end of the day, they're just both elite pass
Most of
rushers.
us would give up a lot to have either one of those guys on our teams, man.
We're literally sitting here with like absolutely zero pass rush or presence on the defensive line for like 2 years. We know exactly what that means. I would give anything for either of those guys. So that's where we sit. When I look at Vegas, though, also offensively tied for the lowest scoring offense in the league. Again, 13.5 points, like we said before, and they just haven't looked really cohesive. They haven't put together very many solid quarters, let alone an entire 4 quarters. Whereas Pittsburgh has shown that, hey, we can do what we need to do to win some games. And I'm leaning that way. I like the money line on the road also. And I think we kind of land right in the same spot there. Under 43.5. Where are they going to score points?
Yep, exactly.
Sometimes I feel like the baked in like 3 points on a total for when you're in a dome just like doesn't always make sense.
Yeah,
It
gotta
just
prove
it,
it.
it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So the last game we have on our slate is one that I'm carrying the burden of alone, and it's a scary one, but rest assured I will ease your guys' minds. So let me just break this one down here. The Rams are heading into Cincinnati. Cincinnati's -2.5. 43.5 for the game total. Now, if I were to just say Team A, knowing how we know the Rams, how the Rams have played so far this year, if I were to just say Team A and knowing how we've seen the Bengals play this year, and I were to say Team B, and I were to say 2.5 points, just completely free of any bias on what these teams have done, you would call me crazy to sit here and say that Cincinnati is a favorite at home this week. And now I get it. Like the Rams haven't blown anybody out. They're not like world beaters in any means. And frankly, the Bengals are supposed to be better than they are. But on the other hand, the Rams are supposed to be worse than they are. We're kind of looking at a Freaky Friday type moment where one of these teams is outperforming expectations and one of these teams is well underperforming expectations. When you look at what the Rams have done, they're playing really well in all facets. Aaron Donald is still an absolutely unblockable menace on a defense. The offense has been playing really well. Stafford has been throwing absolute darts. Like he's not like filling up the box score or maybe killing the grading platform or anything like that. But he's playing really solid football. Puka Nakua, who we've obviously talked about a bunch, he's amazing, man. He's so good. And shout out to
Yep.
him. Love hearing a good story about a dude who just, really deserves an opportunity to excel at the next level and is really just like making the most of it. He's the 11th highest receiving grade, PFF receiving grade in the entire league right now. They've talked about all the records that he's breaking for catches in the first 2 games. I think Peter Schrager said something about like in 2 games he has more catches than any rookie has ever had through 4 games or something like that. So that's
Crazy.
another really impressive feat for them. And something nobody's talking about, they're top 10 in the league in scoring so far, 26.5 points per game. Now, I think that they can continue this going, especially when they have a guy like, I love when a team is unafraid to be like, this isn't working. We're going to move on. Like the Rams are doing with Cam Akers and going, okay, this guy, Kyron Williams, he's playing well. He's the 10th highest graded rushing, or the PFF's 10th highest graded rusher in the league this year. They're just doing well. And nobody thought this would be the case when they're like Cooper Kupp starting on the IR, starting on the PUP. Nobody thought that would be the case, but here they are. They're playing well on both sides of the ball. And I just don't think giving them points, even on the road, is very smart, given how Cincinnati has played. On what planet are these the same teams that we saw last year and this year? Now, I get the narrative that they're slow to start or whatever. You guys can fall into the trends and the narratives if you'd like. And I know that I quoted one of these last week, so maybe I'm part of the problem. But they've had trouble finding their footing, and it's not looking like it's going to get much better. So Cincinnati, this might be the most surprising because I've said this exact statistic 3 different times tonight. Cincinnati also tied for the lowest scoring offense in the league this year, 13.5 points. If I were to tell you that 3 weeks ago that Cincinnati in the first month of the season would be the lowest scoring offense in the league, you'd probably have laughed in my face. And so would anybody, and I would have laughed at anybody who told me that. But here we are, we live in that universe where that's the case. The other thing that absolutely terrifies me is that other people who are smarter about the body, and I get that, like, sports media is a world of, maybe flubbing credentials and things like that. And maybe not everybody's super, upfront with their resume. But when you see, guys going on to radio shows and guys going on to these 3-letter networks who are, sports medicine guys and guys talking on Twitter who are like, Joe Burrow's ankle and Achilles and that type of stuff needs prolonged rest, or he is not going to recover, and it does not look good. Now, he sometimes looks like he favors it. It doesn't look like it affects him too much on the field, but you can tell that maybe something is wrong enough that it's messing with his processing, because he does look just a half second late to a lot of these reads that he's usually right there for when he was making that kind of MVP caliber type play. And now he's just not. And just to further reinforce that, they're obviously 0-2 on game totals, going over on game totals this year. So I'm also leaning on under the 43.5 here. I don't know what it is, what you need to do to fix the Bengals, V. Do you have any other insight on either of these teams? Or are you as shocked as I am to see the Rams as good as they've been this year?
Definitely shocked to see them as good as they were this year. I think we talked about it in week 1. Rams were going to be my favorite pick to be the worst team in the league. I think they're getting plus 1,000 to have the first overall pick. We were already talking about Caleb Williams to the Rams in their own backyard. Seems like an easy slam dunk pick. But man, they're playing way, way better than I expected. And I think a lot of that has to do with Stafford being healthy, where he just was not healthy going into last season, just completely banged up, not able to do much. So if he stays healthy, and if Cooper Kupp can come back this year, they'll be a frisky team, all throughout the season. Looking at this game as a whole, though, this might be one of the more interesting line movements we've seen so far this year. The look-ahead line on this game was Cincinnati minus like 7.5 or -8. But very quickly after their Monday, or coming into Monday, that line dropped to like 2.5 or 3. And that was before we kind of knew what Joe Burrow's status was going to be. And right now it's Friday, we still really don't know what his status for Monday is. So if he does get ruled out, is this line going to continue to move? And are we going to see the Rams actually favored by the time this game kicks off if we have to go to Jake Browning as a starter for Cincinnati? So, I mean, if you're not comfortable with Joe Burrow's health right now and you think he's not going to play, you absolutely have to jump on this line for Los Angeles, because it could continue to move drastically in Los Angeles's favor. I think his health and that question mark is a little too much for me to want to put anything on this game, so just gonna stay away for now. But if you feel comfortable with Burrow playing or not playing, I think that's where you make your bets because this line could move again, given whatever Burrow status ends up being for this one.
Yeah, I agree. I'm right there with you. And that's obviously when you have such a big name player, or I shouldn't say a big name player, but such a pivotal player. He obviously is a big
Mhm.
name, but he's more than just a big name. He's an extremely pivotal player. He's one of the best football players on the field when he's healthy and feeling well. So you're absolutely right. Don't be surprised to see this game continue to swing slowly towards a push or towards a an even, and then like you said, as soon as this info comes out, whether it be one way or the other, you're gonna see it swing in that direction. So
Yeah.
be on the lookout for that, especially with Monday night games. We cannot stress enough that Monday night, Sunday night, people are chasing tilt. People are trying to take care of their losses for the week or
Yep.
trying to chase that really good week that they had, you know, on Sunday into the rest of their games. And there's only one game to bet on. So this game will definitely move. They always do. So be sure to keep an eye out for it. And I still think it's a great value at 3, though, man. I think the Rams are a better team than we thought. And they might not win this division because San Francisco's damn good, but they're gonna be funner to watch. I think they're gonna be a fun team to watch, especially
Yeah,
since like
absolutely.
we talked about this too. The Rams, Caleb Williams, such a great pick. None of them look like they care. I was saying that they look like they're all checked out. Like Aaron Donald just retired and came back, and none of that
Oh,
seems to
great.
matter. They seem to be
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah, looks great over there so far.
So well, that about does it for us, V. What a good breakdown. I think there's a ton of value this week. I can't wait to watch it all come about. So I actually do have one more. So everybody, make sure you get into our Discord. In order to do that, you got to become a member, importantnonsense.com. Sign up for the I forget what it's called. Sign up for the $3 tier to get our sports betting access. You can come in there. You can ask us anything about any game. And this week, I have a special teaser in the Discord.
Nice.
It is unbeatable. It's gonna win by very many fold. So you're gonna want to get a hold of that. We are back same time next week for Locked In, 8 Eastern, Friday nights. What else? Importantnonsense.com. Already said that. Check out all the teams work, betting, fantasy, DFS, guillotine, redraft, anything, all the stuff that you could want. And also you can get any of our IN merch over on importantnonsense.com. You can use promo code LOCK for a nice little discount. Would really help us out. We really appreciate that. And you can check out all the cool stuff. So, one of the new additions we have to the IN merch store, just if anybody's not aware, is we have this new thing called roster resolution. It is an awesome new tool that the fantasy guys have put together, and I'm super excited to see it kind of come about. Anybody can pay a small fee, and the guys will actually pull together an entire panel and break down your entire fantasy team and the league and tell you the exact moves you need to make, who you need to be targeting on waivers, and what type of trades you might have options for. So you're not going to want to miss it. They make that into a private video for you so that, or in a custom video for you so that you have all of that forever and you can even come back. There's no limit. So come back, check us out. That's a lot of fun. I'm excited. If I didn't feel a little out of place about paying for something at my own company, I would definitely, or at the place that I work, I would definitely also be in on that. And
Yep.
maybe I'll earn a favor from Steve and twist his arm and make him do one for me personally. But until then, we'll figure it out. And so that does it for us. V, do you have any parting words for the folks at home?
Enjoyed breaking down all the games with you today, Mason. It was a ton of fun and looking forward to a great slate. And maybe not a great slate, but a watchable slate. There's a couple of good games out there, and
It's not the
hopefully
worst.
it's not the worst. And we another doubleheader on Monday night, so that should be fun. So looking forward to it. And then yeah, talking in next week.
It's going to be fun, V. Can't wait to talk to you next week, my friend. And to everybody else watching at home, good night and good luck.